and welcome to the Beauty in Between podcast, as we are closing out our season talking about all these different elements of what makes me, and you, and where we imagine a new way forward together. I am Katie, and this is my husband, Gabe. Say hi to the people.
Hello, everybody.
And today we have a really exciting guest. I'm excited that she's here with us. Tracey, you want to say hi?
Hi, everyone.
Yay. And I have a beautiful bio to give you all, bring you into the know of how badass Tracey truly is. I also think that's the first time I've said anything adjacent to a cuss word. But it's true. Tracey, in addition to being a general all-around awesome person, is a certified leadership coach and consultant dedicated to guiding individuals toward transformative self-awareness and meaningful personal and professional growth, all reasons that we've asked her to be on today as an author of the book that is here in front of both of us. As an author, Tracey draws insight from her extensive experience across workshops, speaking engagements, and personalized coaching sessions. She is also a certified facilitator in 4 frameworks: the Gallup Clifton Strengths, Working Genius, Enneagram, and Cultural Intelligence, for those of you who are wondering. Tracey is originally from the Bay Area of California and now lives in Los Angeles with her husband, children, and dog, Coda. And she loves coffee shops and every dog she's ever met. And I love that you included that in your bio that you sent over. Welcome to the Beauty in Between, Tracey. We're so glad that you're here.
I'm so excited to be with you all.
So before we dive into the sort of bigger conversation around really owning and naming what we want and where that joins with making impact and healing impact on the world, we wanted to start with the question of what have you been enjoying recently and what have you really been into, if you're down to share?
This will probably betray my age. I am at the midpoint of my life. And when people ask me like, oh yeah, what are your hobbies? Literally right now, my hobby is fiber. I am obsessed with getting enough fiber in my food.
That's good.
Because it's really important, y'all. Okay, so I know this is not the topic of the podcast.
No, that's okay.
Most people do not get nearly as much. And you need something like, I think I'm supposed to get something like 30 grams of fiber a day. And something like a salad, like lettuce doesn't have any fiber. Spinach, these things that are like, you think, oh yeah, being healthy.
You have to be pretty precise.
It doesn't.
You eat, or which vegetables you pick out and stuff like that. If you go that way.
Thank you, Gabe. You get it. So anyway,
I was really just thinking about it like 2 days ago. I was watching a video on it and I was thinking, oh man, I need to eat some more fiber. And I like cooked something right away.
Very good. Berries, beans. Yes, these are the things. Yes.
Berries have fiber?
Yes. Like raspberries are really high in fiber.
I literally had no idea.
Mm-hmm. Yes. It's a whole world. I've done a deep dive into this and I'm kind of low-key obsessed.
Okay, wait. I have to ask actually again before, not too many rabbit trails. Do you follow the Nutrition Tea on Instagram by any chance?
I do. I like that
because she just posted about this. Did you see it? That she just posted that she was wishing that people would bring the same energy that they have towards protein powder.
Oh yeah, it's definitely like.
Yes.
Yes. So that's the most that I've thought about fiber consumption in recently at all, really.
Yes. She's a great account. Yeah, I do.
But yes, I also love that account. Yeah, well, I'm really down with dropping all the links. We'll put that in the show notes too. Gabe, what have you been enjoying recently?
I've been enjoying some video games recently, but also we have some like new tools that we're using and stuff, especially like some AI tools. I know it's like everybody, like it's the huge trend right now, but I've started to look into just different ways that I can use it. And I get obsessed with research sometimes. So going into the huge dive of all the YouTube videos to where like my algorithm or my homepage just like completely takes a transformation over the span of a week. So now I'm like in the middle of that and trying to think of all the different ways to use it, but also using it healthfully.
Yes.
Good to know.
That's
Love that.
Which I feel like I've also benefited from because I've learned more about some AI integration because you've been playing with it.
Yeah. And there are some friends around us who just know a huge amount more that I need to actually talk with to get an idea about and like bounce some stuff off of. So that'll be fun. Fun way to connect with people.
Definitely. And the reason that I wanted to ask y'all this is because we were literally walking up to record this episode, and I was thinking to myself, something I've really been enjoying recently. I'm one of those people who where on Spotify, I'm very into curated playlists, and I have a main playlist that I have curated over the course of like 5 years or so. So generally, I will let that playlist go, and like that is something that I enjoy. But something that has been breaking through that norm for me that I've been loving is I have been playing the entire album in sequence of Cowboy Carter in the car.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. Have you listened to all of it, like all together?
Not the whole thing. Okay, I will.
I am a nerd about a lot of things. Music is one of those things, like from part of my background, and just the curation and the order and the like little transitional moments with Willie Nelson and Dolly Parton. It's such a well-crafted album. And also I love Beyonce, and also I'm from Houston. So it really catches all the things for me.
Yes.
So I've really been enjoying that. And because I can't just say the one, I've also been really into The Good Wife recently. And that is all because of one of my really good friends, adopted big sisters. Shout out to you, because she said I should watch it and she was right. So I've been really enjoying essentially storytelling through music and my TV shows, which has been fun.
Love it.
Which has been fun. And from there, I have no fantastic segue into just the general topic of, other than just diving in. Our audience knows that this episode, the idea is that we want to invite you into stepping into, naming what you actually want, actually naming those things, and also talking about where that can overlap and extend out into impacting the world around you genuinely for good, capital G, and even bringing healing into the world. And a place that I wanted to start with this conversation, because in my experience, not only in my experience, I was just having a conversation a month ago where I thought that I knew what I wanted and I thought I had a good grasp on it. And by the end of the conversation, I was walking away realizing like, oh, I have no idea what I want in general. And we could talk about where there's a practice in your book of the naming 100 desires. I did that just the other day, and like that was really helpful. And we can get into that some more too. But I wanted to start this conversation wondering, Tracey, if you can kind of start us off with why you think and what your experience of why naming what we want can be so hard.
I'm fascinated to hear what happened in your conversation with Sandra. That's hilarious.
We'll definitely get into that.
But I mean, I think it's hard for a number of reasons. I think I've been talking a lot lately with people who feel like I used to know what I want, and then now I'm like really confused. So exactly your experience.
Yes.
It used to be very simple and straightforward, and then for whatever reason, transition, or there's you're in some sort of change. You're like, now it's suddenly gotten fuzzy and I'm not really sure. I think that a lot of times, depending on your background, and I'm sure we'll talk about this more too, is, we've gotten messages either internally or out loud about, focusing on what you want. Well, that's just really selfish. That's not being about the things that we're supposed to be about. So I think there's an extra layer sometimes of judgment or shame, like this is not okay, this is not allowed. I tell this story in the book about, planting tomatoes in my backyard once, and being racked with this like, oh my gosh, like, is this okay? And is this person going to be mad at me? And is that person going to think I'm selfish? And I was like, whoa, like, where is this coming from? Why? This seems like a pretty extreme reaction for something that's pretty simple. And I think a lot of us can have that, especially in our background. If you come out of churches maybe that have like certain types of messages or that kind of thing, it really gets amped up. So I've talked to so many people who are just starting to try to untangle some of those narratives around like, why do we think of our desires this way? Where does that come from? Is that healthy? Is that not? Like, what do we make of it all? And so that can just be a lot to unpack. And so when you're on the spot and someone's like, hey, what do you want? You're like, oh. If you haven't delved into that, it can feel really, confusing.
You can. Yeah. Were you going to say something? You were nodding.
No, I mean, I don't know. I just think the idea of what we want carries so many implications with it, that we're just kind of like told about over time. Like, we're always trying to think about where our actual wants and desires are coming from. And even just like in preparation for this episode, like I was looking at one of the posts you're making, did a little bit of stalking beforehand to get to know a little bit more about you, Tracy. But somebody had mentioned this idea of like kind of this fog, or like the want fog, where you're kind of lost in what are my actual desires and like trying to actually get down to the root of these things. And yeah, I was just thinking about my own things that I desire, where I'm kind of scared of listing these things out sometimes, because I'm like, man, if I list them out, like I almost have an expectation that I have to like do something about it, or that there has to be like a next place for it at the same time if I actually like put it out there for real.
Yeah, it's such a good point, because I think that there's not only the aspect of like, is this okay? Do I have permission? There's also a whole level of, is this realistic? Or what I'm hearing from you is like, oh, almost a pressure. Like if I say this out loud, am I on the hook? And yeah, there's a ton of reasons why I think that it gets kind of pressurized.
Yeah, pressurized, and like a word that you just used that was in that conversation with Sandra, was like, you mentioned the untangling of it all. What you're touching on is also all of the intersectionalities of identity that are already hard enough to name, not just cultural norms that maybe you grew up with and picked up, but also extra messages that were echoed by our families. In my case, I've experienced 2 divorces, which also carries like certain intrinsic and extrinsic messages that got added on to me. And then when you add on the Christianity in the West vibes, that like that echoes and emphasizes different parts of my own background. Like what I'm hearing that I also have experienced, we can almost use me as an example within this episode, which was not the original plan, was that for me, from that conversation to Sandra to the naming of the 100 desires, was really interesting, because when I was talking with Sandra, she was like, wow, Katie, we have a lot to untangle here. And I was like, oh, you're right. And like, I've just sort of been like falling forward in some cases of like, well, I know that I like doing kind of this and I don't like doing some of that. I should probably ask myself questions of like, why? How have I gotten so tangled, to the point of naming 100 desires. And also, I think the way that you define desires even too, I found really helpful, of like, everything is on the table and nothing is off the table. On that list, I covered stuff from the realm of like, I want a dog, and also I want systemic injustice to like not be a thing, and I would like the church to be a part of it, and I want to center Gen Z and Alpha Gen voices in the building of a new thing. Like, huge spectrum, which I know was a big heart of that practice, that as I just kept throwing stuff along the wall, there were some patterns that came out of it that I was like, oh, this is literally new data that I didn't have before I had done it. I was still like, what do I want? I have no idea. I have to have the right answer, and it needs to be like the right thing to bring me out of this fog. But it needs to be more specific than just, I want injustice to go away. Like all of these things that I had put on myself in engaging with this question. And then I did that, and I almost felt like you were sitting next to me on the plane, because I did this on a plane. So that being said, it's hilarious. I had planned to ask you about, and I wanted us to talk about some of the power that comes along with naming what we want. But even within that question, I would love for you to even talk about that practice kind of specifically, which again was not the plan. But if you're down, I'd love to talk about that, because I experienced it being really powerful like 3 days ago.
Love it. Always. Well, I mean, to the first part of what you're saying about how I think that naming those small things, quote unquote small things, versus like the bigger, like succinct thing that you might write down on a like, mission statement. I just find when we try to put up too many categories around it, I think that's where we do get ourselves a little stuck. So I love that in this practice, you felt like, nope, I'm just going to notice the small things. I want a dog. Let's put that on the list. And of course that's, but I think like when you try to approach it in a more like linear way, or there's like a certain traditional way of thinking about that. Well, that's not as important as like what you want to contribute to the world or what your sense of purpose is or what you want as far as like that. But I think that when we do that to ourselves, we're cutting ourselves off from the part of us where that all comes from. And I think those things live, you know, I sort of imagine it sometimes like a set of muscles, right? If you're like working out, like it's the same thing. You got to start with some of the small things sometimes to even build up the muscles and the strength to name the quote unquote bigger things. And I find that, I don't know, trying to split those out too much, we get ourselves a little bit stuck. The practice
yes,
of
we do.
you're like, I can attest.
I just experienced this. Yes.
Yeah. So that's where I'm always like, yeah, you know, like one time someone was telling me, I was listening to myself and I wanted to buy myself a whole cake. And I'm like, yes, as you should, you know, and like, I have to think, in what I've experienced with working with people is that, yeah, when you listen to that and you lean into that, you actually build up the habit and the training and the strength to be able to pay attention to the bigger things. The 100 desires thing, I love this exercise so much because I just think it's so opposite of how we normally interact with what we want, which is like, let's make it as small as possible. Let's make it inconvenient. And so it doesn't bother anyone. It doesn't like take up too much space. And this is like purposely the opposite. Like, nope, we're not going to edit. We're not going to critique ourselves. We're not going to shame ourselves. We're just going to notice what's there. It's about just being fully honest is the most important thing about that exercise, more than like, could this happen? Do I want to commit to this for the rest of my life? Am I ready to make a plan for it? Like you said, Gabe, it's like, no. We're going to eliminate all that extra sort of background noise. And all it is just honesty. What do you want? If you were to just let yourself be fully honest about that and to push yourself beyond your probably natural comfort zone. That's why I think the 100 thing is genius. And I did not make up that. I read that in another book and started doing that with people I was working with. Yeah. And I just find that then it pushes you beyond your natural comfort with it, because most of us haven't done 100. If anything, we give ourselves just like a tiny little space.
And most of them have been given space to name 100 either, or much less 30. That was a pause point for me.
Yes. No, I've literally had people text me, be like, I only got to 23. Is that okay? I'm like, yeah. It's not like it's a magic number, but it's just supposed to be like as much space as you want, as much space as you need. It's there. It can change over time. So I love it just because I think it's spacious. It's purposely meant to be like, and I love it when people come back and they say, I was sort of surprised some of the things on my list. Like, I didn't know I wanted that. I didn't know that I would have like said that before. And that's so funny to me, because I think that happens where it's like, oh, it's there. There's another author. Her name's Emily P. Freeman. She talks about like, you want what you want. You might as well be honest about it. Like, so that desire was there. It's just, you might not have acknowledged it or given it enough space to realize that that's the case.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of thinking of, is like, whenever you're mentioning, Katie, like that idea of trying to get those 100 once, and whenever I saw like within your writing, is I started to try to think of some of those things last night, and I was like, going through these big caveats beforehand, like I was like, man, I have so many questions to feel like I needed to define what this actual, like, what defines that one and what actually counts. Then I was like, thinking the same way of like, okay, well, if I start out with too many big things, I'm going to run out of things too quickly. So I got to start out really small and go piece by piece. And then maybe as I go on, like, it can get broader. But yeah, it's just funny thinking about how, like, within, I guess, like, a lot of therapy talk, like, we deal with emotions in a way where we're like, a lot of people say, hey, you can't control your emotions. So like, don't blame yourself for what you're feeling. You can control how you react to those emotions. Yeah. And we try to, help treat those as a neutral space.
Right.
But obviously, like, with our wants and desires, like, that is part of our emotions and how we interact with things.
Right.
But yeah, we don't really think about it on the same in the same way of having this neutrality where, yeah, we're just wanting to be honest with ourselves and feeling like we have to answer in the right way. And yeah, that was something that I heard you talk about, because that's something that I get so lost in myself, is like thinking that there is a right or a correct option rather than kind of thinking about this broad spectrum and seeing things as very black and white. And I was just wondering, like, thinking about it, how can we help people like step away from that cliff of wanting to make sure that our wants are right or that we're making the right decision? Because I remember you kind of mentioned too of kind of thinking about what are these desires that you kind of want to go after.
Well, first of all, I love how you even just phrase that as far as like making that link to our emotions and talking about it as a neutral. The things that you want, I think that's a huge step of growth when somebody can say, I'm going to go from, black and white thinking, right or wrong, this one's valid, this one's not, to just say all of the things that I want, they're neutral. And it's not saying you're going to pay attention. Like I was talking to someone once who was like, well, I've noticed, I want this next in my career, is like a career step for them. And is that coming out of like fear? Is that coming out of ambition? Is that coming out of a good place of wanting to make it different? I don't know. Like, I'm not sure. Right. And
you're
I
like,
think,
let's chill for a second.
Right. Well, yeah. But I think a lot of us do that. Like, like, what's my motivation coming from? And not like that's a bad thing to ask, but I think that if you spend all your time and energy on just trying to figure out, like, is this okay to want? Is this not okay? Is this coming from a good place? Instead, to just say, well, it is there. And if we treat it as more neutral, as like a piece of information, and you start to take some steps towards that, then you trust that you can learn over time. Is this a healthy thing or is this not a healthy thing? Versus like, I got to have it all figured out from the start.
Yeah.
So I think that's why I think it's important to connect those things to some next steps, because I think that's the other thing we do sometimes is overthink things. Like, I gotta have like the perfect.
Oh, Gabe never overthinks.
I know nobody here would ever do that.
I'm looking at the big list and I'm like, okay, how do I do all of these things every single day? No,
I would never.
Don't do that to yourself. Yeah, that's impossible, and that's even you're naming that and making fun of it, but. Yeah, I think that's the other pitfall is like, oh, I can't. You can give yourself space to let even the process feel creative and open. It should feel energizing and motivating, not like some pressure-filled stressful thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like in the end, it's for you. That's the reason that we're going through these things, is so that we can benefit from them.
Exactly, and you can choose how you want it to feel. Which is probably not stressed out and pressured to do a million things every day. Yeah.
Right.
That's a good point.
Because that at some point is not fun. Yeah. And it's interesting too, because even having this conversation, the power and effect of naming what you want and even sitting through the process of figuring out how to name what you want. And through this book, and then also conversations with Sandra, and this conversation, and other conversations with friends, a key theme that I've noticed for myself walking through, trying to lean into the process of figuring out what I want, because it used to be simple and now it's not so simple. Honesty is a really big piece and experience that I've been noticing is really important to the process. And then I also, what I feel like y'all were just talking about, there's also an element of grace. I think that we need to remind ourselves to take grace and give grace to ourselves in the process. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say one thing that I was just thinking about too is just like, because you were talking about it with this idea, Tracey, where you're kind of like, okay, things aren't going to be right to begin with. And so it has to be kind of this collaborative and learning environment. And we don't really give ourselves that grace to really start off in a place and say, oh yeah, my desires, my wants, like, aren't really what I want them to be yet. And yeah, I was just kind of thinking like about how we kind of think over time, like, okay, we're going to develop them to be better and better wants. And so giving them more and more priority and importance over time. But it's like in the beginning, they're really not really that big of a deal because I haven't really learned how to do wanting well.
Just
and you're like, over time, then those wants will be more important. And so just kind of like, how do you help prioritize those wants, especially for people who feel like for me, I do a lot of things where I do it for other people, where I can say, oh, you know, I am helping other people. And so I kind of use the
Yeah.
wants and desires to see others' lives improve to
Mm-hmm.
then like help myself.
Sure.
But yeah, how do you help reprioritize those things where you feel like, man, my wants and desires aren't really important or useful at all?
Yeah. It's a great question.
Good question.
Oh, sorry.
I would say it probably does come through in my writing because I think that's a majority of the people that I work with is
Yeah.
folks like you who out of, integrity and character and so many wonderful things that are very admirable have tended in their own history to prioritize the needs and wants of other people. And I think there's a great aspect to that. Like, of course, that is part of maturing and becoming a person, a healthy adult and part of like the collective and society. So that's wonderful. And of course, we don't want to say, I'm not saying, yeah, just never think about anybody else and like only, right? Like that's not the message either. But I think the reason why I wanted a huge motivation for wanting to write this book is because I think I've talked to so many people that is their only understanding of how to interact with life. And so therefore it can be really important and generative to say like, you know what? I've done this for X number of years or decades of like only others, only prioritizing. What could it look like in this season to prioritize what I want and to trust that good for the collective will still come out of that? It might be a little unclear at first and might need to grow organically. It's not maybe as like linear or logical, but I've seen it so many times now where that's often what ends up coming out is like you listening to what makes you come alive, what brings you joy, what do you truly want. Usually at the beginning, it feels like, I don't see how that's going to be good for anyone else but me. So that feels kind of scary. But if you can trust and take that courage to say, yes, I'm going to go on this journey. I'm going to be honest, as we talked about, and believe that there is some good on the other side of this and that God wouldn't put these desires in me without there being some wisdom and important things to listen to. Usually what comes out if you let that grow and develop. But it's like, it's very much, I use the word organically on purpose because it feels like a plant. Like there's a shoot of something that comes out and it takes a minute for you to be able to say, oh, this is how this grows or this is the fruit of it. So it requires sometimes, just a different kind of trust. To what you were saying earlier, Katie, like I had a mentor that I really appreciate earlier on. She was just telling me about or helping me untangle, to go back to that image, the difference of like, yes, following Jesus, we want that, but it's not to say, and there's a subtle difference between following Jesus and following sacrifice. Like it's not necessarily following Jesus to say, I'm always going to choose the hardest thing that I hate, And I think, yes, we want to be, we admire people who embody sacrifice, who are willing to do that. But I find that when you talk with folks more deeply who are living that and who exemplify that, there is often a core of desire. Like I remember speaking once to somebody who was serving overseas in one of the most extreme situations I've ever heard of, a town that just basically had no resources. It was not very developed in a lot of different ways. But the way that he talked about it was like, I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. Like, this is amazing. This makes me feel alive. And I was like, wow, that is a really unique thing. That quality of like desire and life and energy. So anyway, that's a long way to say I agree with what you were talking about. And I think that the idea of sacrifice, it's admirable, but it also, I think it can become like the thing versus understanding that that's not actually what we're called to as Christians.
Yes. I love that distinction. And it's like what comes to mind too, again, within the Christendom conversation of pick up, take up your cross and follow me, I feel like has gotten worked in there of the following Jesus should mean, oh, I'm doing something I hate every day, but it's for Jesus. And it is making me think of when you take in the whole of scripture and the whole of Yahweh's invitation to the point of him coming down and taking on humanness, which is, when I really think about it anyway, I won't speak for anyone else, is like kind of gross and like, ugh, why would he do that? But it's like he took on that element and made it good, like capital G, because he knew that he was making an invitation to all of his creation, to all of his image bearers to step into not just more of his invitation to him and life abundant, but that there's also inherent this element of stepping into more of who you are. Like this image that's coming to mind is like Jesus just like holding my face like right in front of me and just being like, I just want you to be you, is the invitation that I hear in like this whole conversation. But it did.
Yeah.
Oh, did you?
I was going to say, like, I really enjoy, and that's one of the main things that I've thought about in this conversation is that idea of trust, where you have to like trust yourself in a sense to be able to like put these things out there. And sometimes, trusting others with your, being able to list out this information. And like you said, it feels like there's some sort of pressure with it as well. But also just being able to trust God of like, hey, here are the things that I'm bringing to the table. And I don't know what to do with this. And looking to him for direction. And yeah, just that going back to that idea of like trusting in yourself where it's like, hey, these desires aren't where I want them to be right now, but there is room for change. And so just knowing that like, hey, I'm not, I'm going to make mistakes and there are things that I want to change in myself. But all of my wants and desires, not all of them are going to be one-sided. And I don't know, I always get into the space where I'm like, oh man, I feel like I'm not doing enough. And so I feel like it's going against who I want to be. And I'm like, oh, this is really showing who I am. I'm not really caring for enough people right now. And so is that really like part of who I am? And it starts to tell me, who or what my identity is, which is the whole conversation that we've talked about this entire season, not letting those things tell us who we are, and trusting ourselves to know that like these things are going to change over time. And so I think even that like practice of going through, like said, like going through the 100 desires, but also knowing that these things are going to change on like a monthly, weekly, daily basis, and that those aren't us just like declaring those things as like our end goals, but just parts of who we are, parts of what's inside of us, but that's not who we're going to be in the end. And that's why it's important to list these things out, is because we also want to know where we want to go.
Yeah.
And where we are at the same time. So
room to acknowledge that there's development and evolution and growth. It's almost like sanctification is part of the plan.
Yeah, it's like not all these things are going to be opposite of the way for the cross.
Right. Well, and I love where we're kind of finding ourselves now. My favorite part of our episodes is inviting our guests and us to say, what is the invitation to our listeners here? So Tracey, I feel like we've touched on a couple of things. What would you invite our listeners of the Beauty in Between podcast? What's the invitation that you would make to them within this conversation?
Well, we've talked about themes of grace and trust and honesty. And I would say maybe one of my main invitations would be to approach these kinds of questions with kindness for yourself. I think that's so important because oftentimes when we ask these bigger questions or things are in a state of like, we're not sure, we're confused, it can be so easy to heap on a lot of self-criticism. And I find it just so much more helpful to say, let's approach this with kindness. So I love that you were, imagining me on the plane next to you, like, hey, let's dive into this. And That makes me so happy because that's what I want for people, is to say, like, it's okay. Like, you don't need to be anxious. You don't need to be fearful. Like, it's all going to be okay. It's going to be really good, actually. So let's dive in. Let's be curious. Let's have some fun with it, and I think if people can have that kind of space for themselves or help create that, like invite other people in to do that with them, that makes me really, really happy.
Yes, and I have to add this link and then I'll add my invitation too of like something else that came out of engaging in that practice with me was that when I went and I had lunch with some of my friends and I shared with them, to me, what were these major aha revelatory moments, they were all like, yeah. And they didn't say like, duh, how'd you not know it? They were just like, oh, we're so glad that you have figured it out because we've seen it this whole time. And I was like, oh, thank you for being receptive to it. And they were like, yeah, come on, which is so fun. And I think for me, the invitation that I would want to make to our listeners is to practice to the best of your ability, taking away that voice, or even doing your best to silence the voice that does say that, you need to get it right. Like, you need to come to the correct conclusion so that you can then carry on with your singular capital P purpose for your life. The invitation is to remove the pressure going into asking yourself these questions, engaging in the 100 Desires exercise. I'm going to keep talking about that one. Go do that one. That's another invitation. But removing the expectations from it and trusting that there is good, capital G, and that there is gold in the practice of simply being honest between you and your good father. Like, if it's just between y'all, and to just trust that there's good that will come out of that, I think is my invitation.
Yeah, no, trusting that the Lord has put good desires in our hearts too, and that we aren't just completely 100% evil.
Yeah.
Is important because, it really helps bring value. And that's, I mean, the magic of knowing what you want, or that it is a good thing. It is a hard thing to kind of handle for a lot of people. So I would just, same thing as what y'all mentioned, like
all good things,
all really good. And just, being able to consider that and not such a black and white space. And there might be something where, okay, this is like 75% I feel good about this statement. But the other 25%, maybe, that'll be something to work on for the next year.
Yep.
And the idea that you can work on your wants, like you can want better once, and believing in the trust and grace and remembering these characteristics of who God is and opening that space up for others to be open about those things and not being judgmental is obviously important too. So yeah, just with that, we really appreciate you being on, Tracey. It's been a wonderful time being with you. And obviously, you have the book that's over here.
Yes.
Wonderful piece. Just flat it out so people can
hold it up. Carry on.
But for the people of the audience with the Beauty in Between podcast, how can they connect with you? Or is there anything you would like to plug or tell them about?
In addition to the book, we're just going to keep talking about the book.
Yes, I poured my heart into the book. Obviously, I would love for people to check that out. I also hang out on Instagram. So my handle is at traceyg.me, and I like to connect with folks there. That's fun. And I also have a tool, like a template for engaging with a vision for yourself for like a year or like 6 months kind of thing based on what you want. And so that's on my website, which is traceyg.me/template. If folks want to check that out.
We will also put that in the show notes.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Well, thank you so much for being here, making time for us, Tracey, and going into the summer months for us in Texas. So to everyone listening, we hope that you found some good and some gold and even some encouragement in this episode. And what are all the things? Subscribe, like, but really what we hope is to engage in conversation. So, our Beauty in Between on Instagram, we are there. Gabe and I both love hearing your thoughts, what's come out of the generative good of these practices. Go, highly suggest engage with Tracey, read her book, buy her book, find her book, share her book. And I think that method you're talking about is the 3x5 method.
Yes.
Is that it?
That is
also a thing that was so helpful for me with Sandra. Again, highly suggest it. Go engage in that template and talk to us about how it was. And then tag Tracey and let her know how it was. So we will talk to you all soon. We'll see you in our next season. Thank you for coming along with this ride. And thank you, Tracey. And we'll see everyone later. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yay, we've done it.
The Beauty in Between podcast is part of the Chasing Justice podcast network. To find out more, go to chasingjustice.com. The best ways to support us and the podcast directly are by leaving us a review, sharing this podcast, and joining the Chasing Justice Patreon linked in our show notes.